How real is this issue, Rush? You mentioned earlier that as you started to delve into it as a subject, as a real idea, you realized the pure significance of this and the real issue. How, I don't know if I'm looking for statistics when I ask this question. I don't know if, but you may have. How real is this issue?
Well, the numbers, a lot of it depends. I mean, if you talk about like the global orphan crisis and the number of kids that were without parents, I mean, there's so many different, you could probably Google it and probably find like a bunch of different numbers because how people define what an orphan is. If it's somebody with only one parent or somebody with children with no parents. So the one thing I would always say about the numbers side of it is like you can actually overwhelm people with the statistics because it is a vast problem, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of kids that are in need, and it's not just like internationally through international opportunity. I mean, just in our own communities, whether here or where you are. I mean, there's kids that are in difficult and vulnerable situations. So what I always tell people to be careful about getting too concerned about the large scope. Because what I can tell you, and I didn't always used to do this. I used to be like a little more aggressive about telling people, do you know the number of children that are, that are orphaned across, and what it can be so overwhelming that people feel like, well, what am I supposed to do? You know what I mean? How am I supposed to solve this massive problem? And so I think breaking it down into saying like, we have really focused here, like in our community here at our church, of like how many kids in our county that my church is in, how many kids here are in need of foster parents, here. And so like, instead of telling people there are X number of millions of children across the globe, we could say, hey, right now there are 134 kids in our county that are in need of foster families, in need of temporary housing to like get them through this difficult stage they're in. And so when you tell someone, hey, there's millions of kids versus 134 kids or whatever the number might be right this exact moment, it's a much more solvable problem, or it's easy for people to like on-ramp into it without being overwhelmed. But it is, I mean, I say that not to minimize the seriousness of the problem. I mean, I can tell you, I mean, from when I was in China, we had the opportunity. I'll just tell you a little story that kind of just talks about just the scope of it. When we went to adopt my son back in 2012, we got to go visit the orphanage in which he was living at the time, which is, that's not, you don't always get to do that. We didn't get to do that with my daughter, but we got to do that with my son. And, man, I mean, I don't know how to, there was just, it was a mass of humanity in this orphanage. And, they showed us the crib that my son had been living in. And I mean, Stuart, it was just a gigantic room full of babies. Not I say babies, some of them were older, it was overwhelming. So like, we, at that moment, my wife and I came home from that trip, man, and we were just like, what is going on? Like, we got to do something beyond this. Like, I mean, at some point we do start running out of room at our table, but what else can we do to like raise awareness about how, this really is a big problem. It's massive. And while we were so thrilled to like, I was holding my son in the middle of this orphanage and we were taking him home and he was having a family, man, it hit us hard. Like, oh my gosh, like, what are we going to do about the rest of these kids? So it is a massive problem. Hurting and vulnerable kids is a big issue across the globe. But if you find in your local community, even there's ways you can get engaged or find places to serve kids in your local community. It doesn't have to be like, you start some massive organization. You can make an impact day to day in kids' lives.